Before we get started, just a quick show of hands. How many of you have attended an information session about the I-77 toll lanes, either by us or by the NCDOT? All right, so for most of you, this is the first time you're actually coming out and hearing such a presentation kind of in depth. I'd add Mark's welcome to mine, and I appreciate you coming. We'll talk a little bit about what we're going to go over here this afternoon. I'll talk some about the project and what all is entailed with the project, so we have a baseline understanding. Talk about where we're at as a group, the status of that, some of the actions we're taking, and then we're going to have some question and answer. I'll talk about a half an hour or so, and then the bulk of this meeting is really to get your questions answered. I would kindly ask that you go ahead and hold your questions until the end of the presentation. I would be happy to flip back to any slide that you want to see, and we could talk about that more in detail. Well, when you're talking about an issue, it's always good to start with a common understanding of the problem. So, at the risk of stating the obvious, the problem is, if you're coming up from Charlotte, there's that stretch just north of 485, where it goes from 5 lanes down to 2 lanes, and you have this bottleneck that carries on all the way up through exit 36, and you have the same thing going down. So you have a congested stretch of 4-lane road from around mile marker 21 to exit 36, and we have no money that we've been told to be able to widen it. That stretch was put in 40 years ago. It has not been widened since it was put in 40 years ago. And it remains the only stretch of interstate in Mecklenburg County, anyway, that is still just 4 lanes. Well, one solution, which was proposed back in 2009, and I also want to point to, you'll see that basically all of our slides are sourced. So this is information, we're not making things up, this is information that is publicly available, and it's mostly from NCDOT and tolling advocates. We just take that information and we come to a different conclusion. One solution is, let's go ahead and widen the road where it's congested, that 13-mile stretch that I just talked about. And the estimate are that comes somewhere between $80 and $130 million. So for round numbers, let's just keep kind of in the back of your head. If we want to widen it where it's needed, that's about $100 million to widen it, okay? We'll just keep that number in our head. Well, the current plan is to have toll lanes starting up here at exit 36 and going all the way down to basically uptown Charlotte. So we have 27.5 miles of toll lanes at a cost of $655 million. Remember, I just told you $100 million, right? $655 million is a long ways from $100 million. Before I get to the difference of that, let's talk a little bit about how these toll lanes are going to work. They're going to be built and operated under a 50-year contract with a company called Sintra. You probably have heard of them. That's a company based out of Spain. They have done similar work with us all over the world. They have 2 toll lane operations in the United States. Both are bankrupt. Vehicles with 3 occupants will be able to use the toll lane for free. So one of the things that you will hear is that these toll lanes encourage carpooling. Electronic tolling, so there's not going to be toll booths here. This is going to be all electronic tolling. You'll have basically a transponder in your car, and there will be certain toll gates that you'll go through, and you will have some sort of a credit or a debit account, and it will automatically debit that. So we're not tossing coins in a bucket, maybe like you've done on the New Jersey Turnpike or something like that. In order to get the value proposition, if you will, of tolling, to get people to go on to toll lanes, they're going to guarantee a minimum speed, and that minimum speed is 80% of whatever the posted speed limit is. So to guarantee that, there's going to be no limit on how high the tolls go. Now, I don't know if you all happened to be on I-77 yesterday when there was an accident. I think it was just north of exit 28. I see some heads nodding and some not too happy faces. When you have congestion like that, what happens is the price of the tolls are going to go higher. The toll lane model is built on the fact that people are willing to pay to avoid congestion. And the worse the congestion is, the more you're going to be willing to pay. That's why if we have the case of an accident or, say, bad weather, toll lanes typically set their record as far as their tolling goes. The problem with that is, the more congestion in the free lanes, the higher price to use the toll lanes. And what we see here is kind of a divergence between what the tolling company wants, which is high tolls, lots of congestion in the general purpose lane, and what the public wants, which is free-flowing traffic and no tolls in the general purpose lane. So the upshot of it is that unless you're going to pay to use the toll lanes, the business model ensures congestion in the general purpose lanes. Okay, so the more congestion that they have in those lanes, the better their business is. And so they want to have congestion in those lanes. And so I think we finally been able to erase from the narrative the fact that this is going to be a solution to congestion. Okay, this is not a solution to congestion. This is an alternative to congestion. What's the difference? Well, okay, so we said our one solution is at 13 miles at $100 million, and the other is 27.5 miles, $655 million. We're saying our solution somewhere between 2 to 4 lanes. The toll lanes would take up all of the existing right-of-way. This is a key point. All of the remaining public right-of-way is going to be used for the toll lanes. And that's important because while if we were to, say, do some modest expansion now, we could expand it in the future, there's this thing called unplanned revenue impacting facility. What that is a really fancy name for if we make an improvement on I-77, what happens? Traffic starts to move. If traffic moves, what happens to toll revenues? Toll revenues go down. Tolling company doesn't want that. So they put in the contract this term, this unplanned revenue impacting facility, where if we make an improvement on I-77 after the toll lanes are built, we have to compensate the tolling company for any lost toll revenues. So the net upshot of that is, I mean, the practical reality of that is if we don't have money to widen it now, we're certainly not going to have money to widen it and pay the tolling company. So once these are in, we're not going to see any improvements, further improvements on I-77 for the next 50 years. We think that's an inevitable conclusion. Why is the difference? I don't expect you to read this chart. It's really more visual. And we'll just kind of cast your eyes in a couple areas. If I look here, remember this is where we said the congestion is. This is, we're going across a causeway here just north of Cornelius, right? And here we are in uptown Charlotte. Well, if I look at all this, we have all of these bridges being either repaired or replaced or new bridges. We have 2 hot lane flyover bridges. We have adding lanes and another bridge. We're removing pedestrian bridge. We're replacing bridges at Oakland, LaSalle, Hamilton Street. We're constructing 2 dedicated hot lane bridges here. We have all of this construction that is going on. It's all down here, but where's the traffic? The traffic is up here. And also replacing the Hambright and the Westmoreland bridges. And so what you have, here's where the majority of travel time savings is, and that's where the majority of cost is. One visual, I think, that kind of helps demonstrate what the difference is between that 100 million and the 655 million is, here's a schematic from the tolling website. So here you see, this is 277. Right as it comes off of 77, I can't remember what the exit is, but you basically come off of that. Here's Hamilton Street. And what you have here are 2, I would call them private lanes. Basically private toll lanes that are not only private, but they're also elevated. So you can imagine the expense in building that. And that doesn't, unless you're a private tolling customer, obviously that doesn't help the folks that are here. So the net upshot, what you see is, you have a lot of the cost that goes towards things other than moving traffic through Lake Norman. 27% toll-specific costs, so like $50 million, for instance, for tolling equipment. There's another $50 million for what's called overhead. You don't have overhead with the general purpose lane. There's toll-related construction. We think tearing down 2-lane structurally sound bridges and replacing them with 2-lane structurally sound bridges is a waste of money. That's what a lot of this is. And then what you see is this small little green sliver here, 15%. That's the amount that's actually going to go for widening the road where it needs to be widened. And again, of course, this is all with toll lanes, but this is the percent that we could actually use that would actually move traffic. So now you may say, well, that's fine, I mean, because it's a private company. Private companies putting their money into this, so let them spend their money, and if I want to use a toll lane, I'll use the toll lane. That's not the case. You, the taxpayer, are contributing $88 million to these private toll lanes. There's also a taxpayer subsidy of $75 million if there's any shortfall in revenue. So basically, if the toll revenues don't cover the debt service over 12 years, I think it's actually 8 years, excuse me, up to $12 million a year, the taxpayer is going to cover the difference. If they only make $1 million in a year, the taxpayer, and they need $10 million, you, the taxpayer, are going to kick in $9 million. So we are subsidizing revenues up to $75 million. Then there's this thing called the taxpayer bonus allocation. The state legislature last summer passed a law that gives regions who do tolling a bonus allocation. And in our case, our region is getting $150 million additional to spend on transportation money. Now, at first blush, you say, you know what? That sounds like a great thing. It's like a windfall. The key question is, who determines where that money gets spent? Where that money gets spent is determined by the Charlotte Regional Transportation Organization. The key word in that is Charlotte. There are 28 towns. They each have a seat at the table. The vote is based on a weighted average of the population. Charlotte's vote counts for 46% of the vote. It takes 90-some-odd% of the other towns to vote against something as Charlotte votes for it. So it's no surprise that the majority of that money is going to not benefit our region, who are paying for the tolls, but it's going to stay in Charlotte. But there's also a criteria that they want to give priority for the tolling corridor, it's called, and spending money in the tolling corridor. Well, what did we just learn about the tolling corridor? If we make improvements to I-77 and it hurts the toll revenues, we have to pay the toll company. So where's the tolling? So where are the improvements going to go in the tolling corridor? They're going to go to the toll lanes. They're going to make special dedicated tolling bridges and spend another $82 million taxpayer dollars further improving the toll lanes. So the total taxpayer investment for the toll lanes is $245 million as it stands right now. Now remember what we said to WidenI77 with general purpose lanes? What was that number? Thank you. You're a great audience. You're so attentive. I love it. All right, so here we have $250 million, and we said we had no money to widen I-77 the right way. Let's talk about the toll rates for a minute. This has gotten a lot of press. This really broke last summer when we made a FOIA request, and NCDOT made these numbers available to us. This is from a study that was done, commissioned by the NCDOT, to justify the toll lanes and the financial viability of the toll lanes. These are not our numbers; these are their numbers. And the numbers I want to point out is on the peak rate. If you're going in the afternoon, so here we see the time of day, and we see how the tolls change based on the time of day. So if we're going from uptown and we're heading home to Mooresville in the afternoon, they're estimating that it could be $11.75 to make that, what did I say, 27-mile trip. And if you're going to do your commute in the morning, so we do the reverse of that, and we go from Langtree down to uptown, $9. So you're looking at $20 round trip when the toll's open. I don't know who's going to pay a $20 round trip when the toll's open. Again, their numbers, not ours. I would say this, those numbers, a $10 round trip, $10 one way, is commensurate with what other toll lanes are charging now. We've seen that in the DC, the Capital Expressway. We've seen that in Atlanta on I-85. We've seen that in California 91 in Orange County. So this is not at all unheard of. When we inflate that, in 20 years from now, it would be roughly a $40 round trip. Well, who is going to pay $40 to go round trip? I don't know. We'll talk about that. Hold that thought in a moment. How much? Well, who's going to pay for this? This is interesting. We see the $40 round trip. This is Commissioner Dave Gilroy of Cornelius. He has opposed the toll line project. Dave doesn't look too happy there. He was the one asking who's going to pay this. These are the guys from Sintra. They said likely pay. Who knows? The fact is we have asked and we've been told that we are not going to know the toll rates until about 6 weeks before the project opens. So we do not actually know how much they're expected to pay until basically after it's all built and we just got to cut the ribbon. Remember we said that toll lanes ensure congestion in the general purpose lane? Well, in 2015, they're saying it's about 1 hour and 20 minutes to get from Mooresville down to Uptown. 1 hour and 20 minutes rather. And the last time I did this presentation in Mooresville, people said, you got to be kidding, that is so optimistic. But again, their numbers Their number's not mine. The net result is, and they're saying it's a little over 2 hours in 20 years. The net result is adding an hour a day to a commute for the average commuter. So if you think about that, that's what, 5 hours a week? Say, I can't do the numbers that quickly in my head. 5 hours a week. It's like 10 extra days or something like that stuck in traffic as a result of this. All right, how do we get on and off the toll lanes? This is from the proposal. Here you see general purpose lanes, so these are the free lanes here, going along here, and these are the toll lanes. And then you have what's called a weave point, where you have this additional lane that comes in here like this. And so what happens is the toll lane driver would come along like this, merge into the weave lane. This is about 2,000 feet right here. Come out, and then you got about another half mile or so if you need to make your exit. This will be going along at 60, 65 miles an hour. This will be going along at 20 miles an hour. You can imagine what that merge is like. I have to tell you that if you're in this lane and I'm in this lane, you're going behind me because I'm not letting you in. You've been warned. I presented this last fall to a group in Mooresville. There was a former highway patrolman in the audience, and he raised his hand and made me go back to the slide. He said, "This is one of the most dangerous things I've seen." If you can imagine having to get over, first slow down 40 miles an hour difference, it seems like it would back up into the toll lanes, and then you have to get over 3 lanes in traffic that's crawling. So, but anyway, this is again not our information. This is what's in the plan. This is kind of a busy slide, but it's important. We'll just spend a few minutes here on this. This is the debt service. This is how much Cintra has to collect in toll revenues in order to pay their debt. And forget about the different colors here. Those are the different types of debt. Let's just look at the tops of these bars. And so here's the years going along here. So if they were to get funding, basically the first year the toll lanes would open, they need to collect about $10 million. These are millions of dollars here. So, and this is annual revenue. So $10 million a year is what they would have to collect when the toll lanes open. And then this goes up to about $65 million a year here, about 20 years hence. Now the question is, how does that stack up versus other toll lanes across the country? I mean, are other toll lanes grossing $10 million a year or what? Let's just, for quick numbers, let's assume that every toll is $10. If we do the numbers really quick, that means about 30,000 vehicles, 30,000 trips a day would have to use the toll lanes, 30,000 back and forth. I-77 in Cornelius, just south of Cornelius, has about 90,000 vehicle trips per day. So basically a third of the vehicles on the road now would have to use the toll in order for them to meet this $10 million number. How does that compare to other toll lanes? Well, the highest grossing toll lane right now in the country is California 91. It's about $45 million. It's in Orange County. It connects 2 million people to 5 million people. About 300,000 people a day go on that road. So we would have to, in 20 years, granted this is not adjusted for inflation, but in 20 years we would have to be the highest grossing toll lane in history. The second highest grossing toll lane that we were able to find is I-95 in Miami, and that's about $16 million a year. And then there's a bunch of other ones in Houston, Denver, Minneapolis, San Diego. They all gross less than $10 million a year. So, if we look at this, Orange County, millions of people, Miami, millions of people, Houston, all huge metropolitan areas, and then we have Lake Norman, which right now has 150,000 people in it. The metropolitan area that's most closely, it's closest. I just lost my. I just lost the batteries. They're going to get some. I'll just speak really loudly right now. My voice will hold out. Y'all can hear me, right? Okay, I won't spit on you, I promise. Okay, all right. So the closest is Salt Lake City. The closest metropolitan area, that's I-15 is a toll lane. It grosses about $900,000 a year, and we need $10 million. We would need basically historically high tolls from the second smallest metropolitan area to get toll lanes. The question is, why would our government fund such a project? We don't know. I'll say this. There's a government agency, the Federal Highway Administration. Their purpose for existence, the reason for existence, is to make loans of this type. If they don't make loans, they have no reason to exist. So we think that they're going to find a way to make the loan. And we cannot assume that the bond markets are going to come to their senses on this, even though we see it as upside down by a factor of 10 at least. So that's why we took the action that we did, which I will talk about in a moment. So where are we at? So the commercial close of the contract was signed last June. And people ask me, what does commercial close mean and what does financial close? The best I can describe it, bless you my son, the best I can describe it is the commercial close is like if you're buying a house, right? And what do you do when you buy a house? You sign a contract, right? But you don't have a house yet. You're like an escrow. You've agreed to the commercial terms of the contract, okay? That's what the commercial close is. And this allowed Cintra then to go out to the bond markets and say, see, we have this contract. Now we're going to go get our funding, all right? As you may have heard, we filed a lawsuit on January 20th, a few weeks ago. Thank you. Appreciate that. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And as you may have also heard, the deadline for financial close was 2 days later on January 22nd, and Cintra missed that deadline. I don't know if y'all heard that or not, but they did. Let's talk about that financial close for a moment. When they signed the contract, Cintra posted a $15 million financial close security bond. If we think about this like our house buying analogy, this is like your earnest money deposit. Okay, if you don't do the deal, the seller gets to keep your earnest money. So if they were not able to achieve financial close, the taxpayer gets to keep that $15 million. It was 210 days they had to get, so 7 months basically to get their financing in order. They did not do it. But the contract allows for extensions for a couple of cases, what's called a relief event, and then for a material adverse change. So if something happens in the bond market that they didn't anticipate, they can extend their financial close deadline. Or they could extend it another 4 months if they increase their security deposit to $50 million. What happened? Well, 2 days before they were going to miss the deadline, NCDOT and Cintra amended the contract. And it extends the financial close out to April 19th. They did so by mutual agreement. And I'll talk about that for a moment. We're used to hearing the terms by mutual agreement in private contracts, right? You know, if the two parties agree to something, then they can go ahead and amend the contract. That's not the case that we have here. We have a case with a private company and a public entity. The public entity is supposed to represent the public interest. Exactly. All right. And so they spent over $2 million on legal fees to craft a 900-page document, which contemplated what would happen if Cintra missed the financial close. At the end of that, when that eventuality happened, they extended the contract with no penalty to Cintra, and you, the taxpayer, are going to pay the fees for refinancing the security deposit, if you will. And not only are you going to pay to refinance the deposit, you're going to pay it for this extension, and the amendment says for all subsequent extensions. And so one of the things that we maintain is this is not acting in the public interest, that you just spent $2 million in legal fees and you're not enforcing the contract that talked about this exact scenario. So now what? Well, before we talk about now what, let's talk about something really important that happened last summer. There's this bill called HB 817. STI stands for the Strategic Transportation Initiative. And it replaces what's called the equity formula. Has anybody heard of the equity formula? Are you familiar with it? Okay, that's okay. This was in place since the 80s, and it dictated how NCDOT spent money on transportation. And it really favored rural areas over urban areas. And the Strategic Transportation Initiative has said, no, you know what? We're just going to look at projects on their own merit. So it's more data-driven. It looks at things like, does this relieve congestion? Does this help grow the economy? What's the benefit to cost ratio? And things like that. So it's supposed to remove the pork politicking. If you've ever been in Eastern Carolina, you see the roads out there. They are wonderful. And a little bit about how it works. I'm not going to go through this whole slide. But it basically, there are three buckets. There's the statewide mobility, the regional impact, and the division. Let's talk about the statewide fund. This is the largest bucket. What's its focus? Address significant congestion and bottlenecks. Does that not sound like us? And it's statewide type projects such as interstates. So this bucket is supposed to address basically congestion on interstates. And in fact, our project, if it were an I-77 general purpose project, would fall under this statewide bucket. Well, we've been bugging NCDOT to say, you know, we think, because it doesn't cost that much to widen it by construction standards, and yet there's a huge difference, a huge impact in traffic, that we think it would score very well under objective criteria. So could you please do a hypothetical score, or a scoring of a hypothetical project? And so they did that. Now they didn't do exactly the project that we wanted. The closest that we could find was widening the road from exit 28 to exit 36. Their number came out at $91 million. Remember what we said it was going to be? So we feel pretty good that that number is pretty decent. They did their whole, whatever their algorithm is, they went through their score, and they came out with a score of 54.86. The question is that good, bad? You know, what does 54.86 mean? How does that compare to all the other projects? I'm glad you asked. This chart needs a little bit of explanation, but it's actually, I hope you find it very insightful. If you think of each one of these little bars as a project, all right? And at the very top was the highest scoring project, whatever it was, I don't remember. And then you have all of these projects, you know, basically rank ordered like this, down to the lowest scoring funded project. So these blue bars here, those are ones that are getting funding. These black bars are ones that, for whatever reason, did not get funding. And then there's 377 projects that aren't getting funding at all. So you imagine this kind of goes down like that. So where did our 54.86 come in on the project? Some of you have already figured it out. It's that little red ribbon right there. It outscores 30 projects that got funding. Our point being, if we just go through, again, their criteria, their algorithm, their project, it outranks 30 projects that are getting funding. We think that if we had an I-77 general purpose lane project, it would absolutely be in the money, if you will. So it would likely be funded. Well, when we came to that conclusion, NCDOT put up a couple of roadblocks. The first one is what's called this corridor cap. And what that means is no more than 10% of the total funding can be assigned to a single corridor in a 5-year period. And NCDOT also needs to widen I-77 south. If you think of like from uptown down to the South Carolina border, pretty bad traffic there, right? That is a $1 billion project. They have to tear down every bridge and all kinds of right-of-way. They said, you know what? That outscores your project up here in Lake Norman. It's $1 billion. So it's going to soak up that corridor cap money for 5, 10, maybe 15, 20 years. This is where, how many of you have heard of the mantra, if we don't do toll lanes, we're not going to get general purpose lanes in at least 10 years or more, right? I see a bunch of heads nod. This is where that's coming from. Game over, right? Let's go home. Let's have a beer. No. Because then they say they're not going to start on the I-77 South project until 2024. If I do my arithmetic right, 2024 minus 2015 is 9 years. So rather than a 10-year wait, we have a 9-year window to get this widened. There's even better news. When can we finally get this ranked? Well, as it turns out, they could go ahead and rank it if it's scheduled to start construction after July 1st. July 1st of this year, all right? July 1st of this year, we could get that little red bar outranking 33 projects. We could get that scored in the plan beginning in July. That's when it would be eligible. But because the I-77 toll lane project is scheduled before July, it's what's called a transitional project, and so it slides in there and it doesn't have to be ranked. Well, they said this very confidently back in July of last year. It's now 2015. They just missed their financial close deadline. And they extended it another, what was it, 3 months, something like that, right? And so we think there's a very real possibility that it will not be scheduled for construction until after July 1st of this year. That's a key point, because if it's not scheduled to begin construction, the law says you have to go through and you have to rank it with all these other projects. So now we face the choice. We say, okay, the whole thing about getting toll lane sooner is off the table, because I have a choice. Do I do the toll lane project, ranking under STI, beginning in July, or do I do the general purpose lane project? Hopefully I've convinced you that the general purpose lane project is cheaper, faster, and better than the alternative that was originally put forward with us. Well, the question is, why would they rank them? I mean, look, we know NCDOT is not going to have us over for Christmas dinner anytime soon. Why would they even bother to rank a general purpose lane project? What could force them to do that? The answer is because they've already said it's important. Again, their words, not mine. It's a critical transportation corridor. We have an immediate need, a critical need. They're already saying that this is important for them to do. And so all we're saying is, fine, let's follow the process and we'll hold you to your word. So what's next? Well, we're going to continue with the lawsuit. And we've had some pushback because people have said, look, you guys are playing Russian roulette. If you stop this toll lane project, we're not getting anything for 10 years. Well, I hope I've been able to convince you that we put quite a bit of thought into how we can actually get the general purpose lanes, not only within the same time, but we think actually sooner than the toll lanes. So that's why we're going to continue with the lawsuit. Guess what? If we fail with the lawsuit, we get toll lanes. We're no longer worse off than we are now. And then we need them to rank the general purpose lane project starting in July. We're asking them to simply follow the process, but to do this, we're going to need political support. And that's primarily going to come from the state level. So what can you do? If you have a pen and pencil, you could help us like right now, because these are your representatives in the Lake Norman area. I know Charlie, I know John. I barely met John. I know Jeff. I have not met Senator Curtis. But these gentlemen are the ones we need to say. We need a general purpose lane solution. And if you don't know exactly what to write, here's what you write. We need a general purpose lane solution scored under STI beginning in July when it's eligible. And I have to say, we had a staunch advocate for doing just that. You all in Iredell had a staunch advocate for doing just that. He's here today, Robert Brawley. I wish you were not here. I wish you were in Raleigh. All right. I'll give you just a minute. Phyllis, do we have some flyers that have some suggested language in the back? Okay. So Mary Lou is passing some out. If you'd like to get a sample of that and those email addresses, that would be a good start. Something that you could do right now this afternoon. What else can you do? Well. First, you've done a big thing because you came here to learn more about the project. Second, you can tell your friends and neighbors. If you'd like, we have flyers to engage local businesses. We have been very successful lately in having business engage in that. I'll talk about that in a moment. If you're a Facebook user, please like us. We have over 5,300 likes on Facebook. I think we're the most liked page in the Lake Norman area. If you have the time, we're going to plan a road trip. We're going to charter a bus, or we're going to call it the Toll Buster, I think is what it's going to be. To Raleigh, we have hundreds and hundreds of cards that people have signed that we're going to deliver to the governor, and hopefully engage some of our legislators along the lines that we just talked about. And finally, lawsuits are expensive. We've had hundreds of people donate. We are going to need to continue to do that. I would ask that you would seriously consider a donation. Think about it. For the cost of one day's worth of tolls, you know, we would put that to use to, I'm sorry, one day's worth of tolls, we would put that to use as an investment in our community. For what you save on a tank of gas these days. Well, if you're a business, I'll just run this quickly. You know, we could basically, if you run a special that's promoting our cause, or even something not necessarily linked to it, but you agree to donate a portion of the proceeds, we would promote your business. With our over 5,000 Facebook likes and our blog site, we reach over 20 to 30,000 people a week. These are local people who support our issue. I don't know of any other entity that's offering you to reach 20 to 30,000 local customers at zero cost. We would put you on the honor system. Tell us what you're going to do, cut us a check. It's a win-win. We promote your business, you get more business, we get money to continue our lawsuit. Lawsuit, we figured to go to trial is going to be somewhere between $40,000 to $60,000 is what we're going to need. And we are up against some big pockets. As far as the donation goes, we are a 501c3 organization. Your donations are tax deductible. We do have to report to the IRS. We are chartered as a public interest group. If we do not hold to our charter, we are going to be in trouble. The board directors, I am a board member of it, so I will make sure that we absolutely stay on issue, and I don't even have to keep the other people on there. We are so dedicated to this, to the public interest. So, look, we think we're your best shot. Right now we think we're your only shot at getting this critical transportation artery widened without tolls. If you would like to pay or make a donation by credit card, I think we could do that.
Yes.
We can. We could take a check if you'd like to send us a check. You can make it out to WidenI77 and send it to us here in Cornelius. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention. I think it went about 10 minutes over, but hopefully I hope that you found it informative, and I'll go ahead and take your questions.